Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of Genealogy 101. I'm so excited because we're going to talk about cemeteries, migration, DNA testing, and forensic genealogy, which is coming. It's a new, fast, and upcoming thing in the genealogy world. So we're just going to dive right in. I'm Martha. If you don't know me, you can go back and watch part 1, also here on the library's YouTube channel. So there we go. So a cemetery is like a book. So many stories. My mom recently passed away, so I spent a lot of time in a cemetery, and sometimes I just walk around. I like to look at things. I like to observe things, and so it is a book. It's an open book. There's so many stories, just there in the cemetery, and it's sometimes breathtaking how many stories you can find. So here's a funny little meme. Someday my headstone will read, "If you're reading this, you're standing on my boobs." Just because of sometimes how people are buried and how their tombstones are set. And I didn't include it in this genealogy presentation, but I actually have a full thing of what different religions believe in how bodies are buried and tombstones are set. So a cemetery, graveyard, churchyard, whatever you call it, a cemetery comes from the Greek, which it means to put to sleep. Graveyards are burial places that are connected to a church. In the UK, they're called churchyards. And cemeteries are burial places that have no church connections. So there's types of cemeteries. There's churchyards and graveyards. There's public and municipal cemeteries, private cemeteries, family and customary cemeteries, fraternal and lodge cemeteries, and then military and veteran cemeteries. So a churchyard is usually surrounded or adjacent to a church. They're usually small, and there's never enough space to bury a current generation of members. That's for church members only. Graves along the cemetery fence or wall were usually set for the souls who were unwanted by the church, so stillborns, illegitimate, slaves, people who committed suicide, or those unknown. If the church moves for some reason, the old cemetery would become abandoned, and sometimes the remains were not removed, but when built upon. But nowadays, cemeteries are becoming protected. So that's really, really cool. My grandparents, one set of my grandparents are actually buried in a churchyard. And so none of our other family members can be buried there or anything like that. A graveyard is any land set aside for burying the dead. Clergy would be able to help you gaining access to the church yard records and deeds. Public and municipal cemeteries, these are owned and controlled by a government entity. They have to remain open to everyone since it's funded by tax dollars. The upkeep is done by the city or county, and if there are graves 50 years old in the cemetery, they're eligible to receive funds for historic preservation. Private cemeteries, these are usually they're privately owned. They could be for-profit or non-for-profit. The for-profit ones would be if your ancestors wanted to be buried among their own class. So if they were an upper class, they would actually pay to get into this private cemetery. You would have to enter through a gate. It would be gated. And you would just need to know your stuff before gaining access. And to gain access, you would need to find the owners of the cemetery. Family and customary cemeteries. These are usually found in rural settings, on family farms, outside small communities. They usually contain the most personal family information. There's no legal status, and it's tended by descendants. Some of these are becoming, there are very few that are being developed now because of governmental rules and regulations related to human remains and cemetery maintenance. Fraternal and lodge cemeteries. These are located within public or private cemeteries, and the organization's membership goes towards the upkeep and maintenance of the cemetery. Military and veterans cemeteries. The most popular that you would probably know would be Arlington Cemetery. The United States government operates it, and the National Cemetery Administration was created during the Civil War. And currently, there are 149 military cemeteries in the United States. So cemetery records. What are you gonna find with cemetery records? Cemetery deeds, the size and dimensions of the plot, the name and the address of the buyer and the seller, the amount paid. The lots are cemetery lots are extremely expensive nowadays. The location of the burial plots, what section it is, what row it's in, the name and the address of the cemetery where the plot is located. So Plat records and Plat maps, those are going to have the information about the physical grave, the lot number, the grave number, the description of the site, the description of the grave monument, including inscriptions and symbols. The Plat maps are going to show the layout of all graveyards in a cemetery, with the burial roll number, all that kind of stuff. Burial permits and records, because you need to have a permit to be buried. These are issued by the funeral director, who's registered with the health board. It has the name of the deceased, the date of death. They are similar. They can be simple or as detailed as possible. And this stays with the funeral director. Funeral records, so that's going to have the name, gender, age, death, location, or date and location of death, the cause of death, the burial place, the cemetery, the plot number, the description of the casket, clothing, how many pallbearers, funeral service, and this is kept by the funeral home. And a lot of this too, without like the description of the casket and everything, is going to be on the death record. So death records. This is legal proof of an individual's death. So early information on the certificate was the deceased name, the date, and the place of death. After 1910, it talked about the individual's life and the circumstances of death. In later years, it has race, education, occupation, marital status, the spouse's name, maiden name, birthplace, social security number, military service, their last residence, their parents' name of informant, and relationship to the deceased. With older records, you have to look for errors. There's transcription errors, there's typos can occur also, and not everyone could obtain death certificates. Probate records. This includes will and estate records. So they'll list the name of the deceased, their spouse, children, married daughter, spouses, and grandchildren. This will also have name of the executors of the estate, the heirs, the debts, their assets, documentations about how their assets should be distributed, signatures and witnesses, and possible family members. Sometimes these are put into actual family histories. Obituaries. These are a favorite for a genealogist. They're loaded with information and they're increasingly easy to locate nowadays with the invention of digitization and that whole movement of digitizing newspapers. So you can obtain the full name of the deceased, the time, the date, the cause of death, the place of birth, the name of the spouse, children, their spouses, their place of residence, names of grandchildren, nieces, nephews, siblings, and sometimes former spouses, occupations, employers, military service, memberships, religious affiliation, funeral home in charge of arrangements, date and time of burial, and the cemetery where they are buried. Other records to consider is there's an autopsy done, coroner's report, city directories, land records, court records, institution records. Um, so going into tombstones, um, at a cemetery, there is typically a grave marker that is used to mark the spot where a person is buried. Originally, it was a large, heavy boulder that was placed on the wooden lid of the coffin before the dirt was shoveled in, because they believed that the stone would protect the corpse from grave robbers, and to ensure that the body would remain peacefully underground and away from the control of evil spirits. This also kind of turned into, they have vaults now are um, that are used instead of these large boulders. Also with the um, iconography, the symbols have changed over time on tombstones. During the colonial periods into the early 1800s, there's death heads, skeletons, skulls used, crossbones, and they were less ornamental in the South. Early 1800s to mid 1900s, there's symbols of eternal life, angels, mourning a willow, eternal sleep drapery. The mid to late 1900s to present is symbols of the person's life, like their hobbies, their occupations. One of the hardest things with choosing your parents' tombstone is trying to reflect their hobbies or what they loved. And so that's something that you see now in cemeteries as people's lives displayed on tombstones and headstones. So evaluating a tombstone, consider, what the stone is made of. If the stone was erected long after death, there's likely to contain errors. I'm going to show you the different types of stone that was used. So there was sandstone, limestone, and slate used through the 1850s, 1830s to 1880s. They started using marble. To the late 1800s through 1920s, they started using, gray granite, bronze, zinc, more of raised lettering. And then post 1920s, you have the polished granite in many sizes and shapes, and then the introduction of rose granite and black granite. So reading headstones, if there's possible weathering done to the tombstones from precipitation, temperature changes, winds, so stones can crack. You have biological weathering, there's mold, algae, ivy, chemical weathering where the minerals of the stones can be altered, so that's acid rain. So weathering versus erosion, they affect the stones in different ways. So weathering breaks down due to temporary or intermittent effects of the local climate. And then erosion is the result of some types of more abrasion, active abrasion. So with fieldstones and limestones and sandstones, you're finding more of those weathering. So here is a fieldstone. This person died in 1865. So you can see that there's a little bit of erosion or weathering going on this gentleman's tombstone. Then you have sandstone. You can hardly even read that tombstone. There's so much weathering going on in it. Here's a limestone. We actually, here in the museum, we have a limestone tombstone, and it is there is weathering on it, and it's a little hard to read. This one is immensely hard to read. Here's marble. So you can see this person passed away in 1928 and his wife in 1945. Here's a gray granite tombstone. And here's some rose and the polished black granite. With the polished black granite, they can do a lot more with the stone and all that kind of stuff. Here's an example of an iron headstone. You have slate here, which slate is really extremely hard to read. Here's bronze, white bronze or zinc, as it could be considered. Here's an example of bronze, which I have seen this before in a couple cemeteries around here. Here's wood. Sometimes in the family cemeteries, they'll just have wooden crosses. So planting, there's also a lot of, especially to mark locations of ashes, people use trees or shrubs, particularly roses, and this is accompanied by a little small inscribed metal or wooden marker. So it's just more than dates, names and dates. So it might have places of birth and death, relationships, maiden name, occupation, military service, organizations. Sometimes with tombstones, you can figure out their ethnicity. You can figure out other biographical information and whatnot. I know with my parents' tombstones, my dad is still living, but my mom passed away. We actually have my siblings and I's names on the back of the tombstone, along with my mom's love of cardinals and my dad's love of fishing. So here's a soldier's monument in a cemetery. Another great, Arlington is a great cemetery to go to, but also Gettysburg too. The cemetery in Gettysburg is a really, really cool one to go to. If they're part of the GAR, they might have a GAR symbol on their tombstone. World War II, and I believe the Vietnam War and all that kind of stuff get the bronze plaques, which the United States military and the veterans provide those. And here's just some fun tombstones too that reflect people's personalities. There's the car tombstone, there's the motorcycle one. I've seen an airplane one be cut out of granite. You have these ones where their photos are I don't know what to call it. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But they're like sandblasted or engraved or etched. There we go. They're etched into the stone. You have these ones. There's a race car. There's the dog sitting by the crypt. You have Merv Griffin's with a little quote on it. Rodney Dangerfield with his Scrabble. That one's pretty cool. This one, she fell asleep while reading a book. You have this one where it's like a complete living room, almost. Parking meter. Yoda. You can get Yoda put on your tombstone. This one is pretty fun. The Mario mushroom. You can do photographs on stone. Here's a couple ones. You can do a QR code with that's a quick response code. So a lot of people are starting to put QR codes on tombstones, so then you can scan them and then it will maybe go to their Find a Grave page, or it may go to a family history page, things like that. There's the talking tombstone, which as you can see, there's a QR code on there. So you would scan it and then it would actually go to a a video of people talking about their loved ones' lives. So planning your trip to the cemetery. So we went through like, what stones look like, what can be on them, all that kind of thing. So if you're going to go plan a trip to the cemetery to find your ancestors and their tombstones, here's what you should be prepared for. So, stay focused. What do you want to accomplish? What do you want to gain from your visit? So set those goals. Plan your route. What cemeteries are you visiting? Plan out how you're going to get there. Like if I would go to my family's cemetery in Pennsylvania, like, am I going to fly? Am I going to drive? Find maps if possible also. So pack your cemetery bag. So have your cell phone, a car charger, digital camera with lots of batteries if you don't want to use your phone, a soft paintbrush for clearing grass or dirt off the stones, scissors to trim the grass, a spray bottle to clear the mud from markers, a kneeling pad for when working on stones, an 8x8 mirror to reflect light to help with taking pictures and to try and figure out if the stones are fading, to help you figure that out. You want to take foil and cardboard to create a light reflector. Cemetery forms for notes, bottled water and snacks, first aid for minor cuts and scrapes, sunscreen, bug spray, hand warmers, mufflers, especially depending on what time of the year you go, boots or shoes with treads for more stable walking. You also want to mind your safety. Be aware, take a buddy, always have your cell phone charged. If you see signs of vandalism, leave the area and report it to the cemetery office or report it to the police, different things like that. So learn the lay of the land and pay attention. So check for brochures, maps, any historical or notable burials, drive or walk around the cemetery so you get the general layout. Pay attention to what you're doing and where you're walking, and don't lean on monuments because you never know if they could just fall over. Be skeptic and respectful. Remember, if something isn't engraved in stone, that doesn't mean that it's true. Take lots of photographs. Take only photos. Leave only footprints. Don't take anything from markers or tombstones or things like that family members have been put out there for them. Avoid doing anything that could damage the stones or grounds. And if there's a funeral service near you, reroute until it's over. Whenever I go out to my mom's grave, I always checked obituaries to make sure that there's no burial out there at that time. So some cemetery information that's online. Find a grave. This says 160 million records. It's actually 180 million records are available online. Billiongraves.com. You can upload pictures right from your cell phone, as well as also Find a Grave. And then US Gen Web, you can search the United States. So now, after you've planned all this and whatnot, you could create a Google map with migration. So this is really simple. You can just Google My Maps, and you can create and share custom maps with Google My Maps, and it's pretty awesome. You can use it for pretty much anything, but I use it for genealogy. I actually read an article in the genealogy magazine that we have at the library. I think it's Family Tree, that about this and how to create it. So this is a screenshot of the Warwick genealogy map that I have created. So different families have different colors, but as you can see, like my family started in Pennsylvania, they went to Ohio, they actually then to Indiana, out to North Dakota, to then back to Indiana, to Wisconsin. And then also you'll see a little dot in New Mexico, and that's where my grandparents were actually killed, or not my grandparents, my great-grandparents were actually killed in a car accident. So you can kind of sort of track the migration, and each family has a different color to it. And then you can put information in here. So as you can see, the marker in North Dakota that has that my great-grandfather, so Daniel E., was born on July 4th to Daniel E. and Elizabeth, and that he was born in Rolette County in North Dakota. And then you can see the marker for in New Mexico that same Daniel E. and his wife Elizabeth died in a car crash with 2 others on July 15th, 1963. So it's just really, really cool with that. This is my Hershey-Kramer genealogy map. I have a couple different maps created. You can actually put in your own markers. So there's a tombstone of the marker, and then also you can put in layers. So you can see off to the side that there's a Hershey family is checked and the Kramer family is checked. So I could uncheck that Kramer family and it would take out all of the Kramer family and just leave the Hersheys. So if you have any more questions about that, you can reach out to me through the library or email napanyhistory@napanylibrary.org to talk to me a little bit more about my Google Maps and migration. But we're going to talk about DNA testing and is it safe? So myths about genetic genealogy is that they use hair and blood samples to trace a person's ancestry. In realization, you're just spitting in a tube or doing a cheek swab. Another myth is that they can pinpoint precisely where your ancestors lived or where the tribe in which they belong to. Reality, you have to do that research yourself. It's going to show you different things with your genealogy, but you're going to have to do that research and really drill down into it. Another myth is to find if you and another researcher descend from the same third great-grandfather, you're going to have to dig up his body for a DNA sample to test. No. If you find a descendant of your third great-grandfather through a male line, ask him to take a test. Ask him to spit. Because this man is going to have inherited your great-great-great-grandfather's Y DNA. Another myth is that they are 99.9% accurate, just like the DNA test on CSI. There are current problems with genealogy DNA testing. There's something called the Scandinavian problem, where everybody comes back saying that they're Scandinavian or have a little bit of Scandinavian in them. But it involves a lot of analysis and interpretation, and they can suggest but not prove relationships. Another myth is that you can finally find out who your great-grandmother's parents were. They're not going to identify who your ancestors were, but they're only going to indicate whom you share DNA with if that person chooses to share their DNA through Ancestry.com, through GEDmatch, through MyHeritage, through different websites. So the types of DNA tests, there's the mtDNA, which that's the mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down almost unchanged from a mother to her children. There's the Y-DNA testing, which is a Y chromosome passes through unchanged from father to son. So you can actually track the male line of your family. An AT-DNA test, this is the most common and the most used for genealogy DNA testing. And then there's something called the X-DNA. which so genetic genealogy testing companies, there's 23andMe. They also do a health a medical history side of it. There's African ancestry DNA, DNA consultants, family tree DNA, which you can do the mtDNA and the Y-DNA test through. Those are extremely expensive, though. There's Living DNA, there's MyHeritage DNA, there's the National Geographic Genographic Project, but I think that might have wrapped up. And then there's the Oxford Ancestors and the Pathway Genomics. So then there's DNA analysis tools, which these are third-party websites that you can upload your DNA into. There's DNA GEDCOM, there's DNA Land, there's GEDmatch, there's Geographical Genealogy Tools, GeoManMate Pro, and then Katie Mudson Cooper's Segment Mapper. So we're going to talk about forensic genealogy. This has become, since 2018, this has become a huge topic in the genealogy world, and there are actually now a lot more forensic genealogists out there. So what kind of stemmed this is in 2018, this book by Michelle McNamara called I'll Be Gone in the Dark was released, and this was her obsession of finding the Golden Gate or the Golden State Killer. And she even mentioned in her notes that she wanted to somehow upload this killer's DNA into Ancestry or anything like that so that they could create this family tree and try to find the killer. So the Golden State Killer was actually captured in April 2018, and he recently pled guilty to all of his crimes. And how did they do this? It is pretty crazy. So they actually took his DNA and uploaded it into a third-party genealogy website called gedmatch.com. And they were able to create his family tree and find relatives like cousins, all this kind of stuff. And it was between the gentleman that you see on the screen and another gentleman that was in a nursing home in Oregon. They went to the gentleman first in Oregon, and they figured out that it wasn't him. So they knew that they had their guy after they built this extensive family tree of using his family members who had uploaded their DNA into this website. So cold cases solved since the Golden State Killer because of DNA. There's hundreds of there's probably almost a little over 100 cold cases that have been solved since then. There is a gentleman who was arrested in Fort Wayne for a 1988 rape and murder of an 8-year-old. There's also then a gentleman who was arrested for a murder of a 25-year-old teacher in 1992 after using a DNA that was left on a carpet sample. They found in 2018 that this guy that was executed in 1999 was actually the murderer of a 9-year-old girl. And so that's just really crazy. And they were able to trace his DNA back through second cousins and third cousins once removed. And they actually exhumed the guy's body to confirm the match. Also, there was a guy who was arrested for a 1986 rape and murder of a 12-year-old girl in near Washington. And they were able to trace the suspect's DNA from semen to a family tree of a Native American great-grandparents which led him to investigators to two brothers. And so they're able to get his DNA on a discarded napkin. Also, there's a gentleman who was apprehended in Washington for the 1897 murders of a young Canadian couple. And they were able to trace his DNA to second cousins listed on GenMatch database, and helped identify a suspect in 2 days. And has been reported that over 100 cases have been solved due to the use of genetic genealogy. So not all cases are good candidates for using this genetic genealogy approach. The DNA must be of good quality and quantity, and have strong genetic code. The lack of strong DNA is a chronic problem in solving the Zodiac killer case, in particular because saliva from the stamps that he licked in sending taunting letters to law enforcement is weak. So, you know, using these using the genealogy, the DNA that police have and all that kind of stuff, it has to be really, really good. And you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, like I have my DNA on third-party websites, all that kind of stuff. They say if you don't want your genealogy or your DNA to possibly find a killer in your family, don't upload it to third-party sites. And that's just up to you if you want to use like GenMatch or anything like that in saying that. GenMatch is actually the site of is a hobby for a person, and he created it in 2010 after seeking the power of DNA searches to link people and computer program expert to write a program that made it easy and functional for usage. It says that he was unaware until the Golden State Killer case that his database was being used by law enforcement. So, they quickly updated their privacy policy saying, hey, you're free to take your profiles down. But most of the people have not, and the site adds about 1,500 new profiles a day. So, the owner of GenMatch has come out that he's not comfortable with the police and law enforcement using his site to find violent criminals, but, he really doubts that it's possible to prevent that. But that's really what's going on. It's these forensic genealogists who are out there trying to help the law enforcement to solve these cases. So here's some random genealogy advice to end us out. Genealogy myths to avoid. Don't buy your family's crest. The census was burned to a crisp. Well, the 1890 census was burned to a crisp. Your whole family history is online. You have a famous ancestor, or you have a famous ancestry. The courthouse burned and all the records are gone, and your ancestor's name was changed to Ellis Island. Some sources that are available to you are business and employment records, if they're indentured records, insurance records, merchants' account books, professional license, railroad, mining, and factory records, company newsletters, government patents. All those patents are available online. Like I said earlier, cemetery and funeral records are available. Censuses, church records, court records, adoption records, ministers' journals, baptism and christening records, birth records, coroner files. It's all available at your fingertips. You just have to dig for it. There's directories, home sources like birth certificates, death records, marriage certificates, artifacts, all that kind of stuff. Migration records, institutional records, land and property records, military records, all of that is available. You just have to take the time to find it. Newspapers, birth announcements, engagement, marriage, anniversary announcements, family reunion announcements, legal notices, local news, obituary, and death notices. Published sources, so compiled genealogy, genealogical local and county histories, vital records, so birth certificates, death certificates, marriage license and certificates, divorce decrees. Anatomy of a source citation. So when you're sourcing your citations, you want the title of the record, the volume and the page number, certificate number, number of record, the date of event, the format of the record, if it's paper, if it's online, the author's name, database name, website URL, date accessed, and notes. So 11 key genealogy libraries and archives. You have the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne. In Houston, Texas, they have the Clayton Library Center for Genealogical Research. You have the Family History Library in Salt Lake City. The Denver Public Library is a great source. The Library of Congress, the Mid-Continental Public Library, the National Archives and Records Administration, the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution Library, the New England Historical Genealogical Society Research Library in Boston, Massachusetts, the New York Public Library, and the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County in Cincinnati, Ohio. 6 tips for researching genealogy records is make sure that the place that you're requesting them from, the information from, has the materials needed for that and to find that information. So if you're looking for something in Pennsylvania, you're not going to email a place in Indiana for it. Find their instructions for requesting information. Some places have a fee or they have a form for you to fill out. Double check all your information to make sure that it's correct. Be realistic. If you don't receive a response in a couple months, send a follow-up message. Ask about an interlibrary loan of the book from a distant library. And then last but not least, online digitized family histories. So if they have a little money symbol there, a subscription is required. So Ancestry.com, Family History Books, Google Books, Heritage Quest Online Family and Local Histories, Internet Archives, Making of America, and My Heritage, a complication of published sources, and then World Vital Records. So thank you all so much for joining me for Genealogy 101. I hope that you've learned something, and Genealogy Club is back in August when we're taking every precaution necessary. So we will be sharing those details in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening.